Ezra's done some amazing work over the last 10 years, and I'm sure some of you guys have seen some of his work with Hillsong and whoever else, but Carrie and Cody, all those guys. But it all started with two stuffed animals called Teddy and Bob.
Oh my God.
Oh, you can do columns, or you can do just one large screen. You can configure it differently, or you can just put a different background up, and the LED screen gives churches this canvas for their stage that they can easily tweak with just a PNG file. And now they've got a whole new stage design.
I remember working on a tour for Carrie Job and Cody Carnes for the Garden Tour a few years ago. She used a phrase that was really powerful. She said, I want people to be able to worship with their eyes closed, but I want them to be able to worship with their eyes open as well. And so that was this powerful phrase that we kind of kept in the forefront of our mind of let's actually use this as a tool for worship.
Paul and Ezra, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so stoked to hang with you guys today.
Yeah, great to have you guys. Hey, for those of you who don't know, who are watching, Paul and Ezra make up the team that is Sunday Screens. And so we're excited to have them on, chat a little bit more about the story behind it and what the resource is for for today's modern church, and for those looking to kind of bring some great visuals to your worship gatherings. So before we dive in, I always want to get our listeners connected with who our guests are. And so Paul and Ezra, I'd love for you guys to just share a little bit about your background, your story, who you are, what you're up to these days. So let's go ahead and start with Paul. Why don't you share a little bit about who you are with our audience?
Yeah. So I'm Paul, and I've been doing video work for the past 15, 20 years. I grew up here in Fort Worth, Texas. I was involved at Gateway Church for almost 20 years since that church started, from the early days, and worked there for a season, did video production there, and then started my freelance career, and been doing that for a few years. And then, the whole time kind of working with Ezra here and there, but it was really just in the last year where me and him decided let's do this together. Let's make background visuals for the church more accessible. And that's when we linked up and started dreaming up Sunday Screens.
Yeah, so Paul and I grew up, like you said, at Gateway, and we actually met at the tech booth at Gateway, and very quickly hit it off. I think at the time I was working on some kids video, and I was racking my brain, my little 13-year-old brain, on how to finish it or how to, whatever. And he was like, oh, why don't you just do this? And I was like, I guess we're going to be best friends now. And then we went to college together, went to Bible school. We were roommates. We're still best friends, have been for the past 15 years. So getting to work together has been awesome. And yeah, we're just super passionate about, equipping the church. We've always been just church kids, and we both were homeschoolers, and had all of our social life with the church, and learned everything from the big brothers at church. You know what I mean? We played in the youth band together. We're through and through just church boys, and very proud to be so. And so, the opportunity to now work on Sunday Screens and get to serve in this more direct way to the church at large is just really a dream come true. So yeah, I
think there's probably a band name in there with church boys. I feel like you could really start a pop punk resurgence band that, kind of Reliant K-esque, and you could just call it Church Boys. And I feel like it would probably take off with a lot of nostalgia these days. But what a fun story, just meeting at the tech booth and getting to know one another. And I'm wondering if you can, give me a picture for when you guys were teenagers, when you guys met. What was your church doing when it comes to visuals? Give me a throwback to what the current setup was at that church.
Paul, you got to take that one.
Yeah, I got to take that one. Okay. Oh man. So great memory. Ezra started out, Ezra's done some amazing work over the last 10 years. And I'm sure some of you guys have seen some of his work with Hillsong and whoever else, but Carrie and Cody, all those guys. But it all started with two stuffed animals called Teddy and Bob.
Oh my gosh.
And is it too far back?
No, I like
that's where it started. Ezra would, he was 12 or 13, and his mom was one of the children's pastors. And so he would make these crazy videos where he was both Teddy and Bob, and he did these British accents and stuff, and it was incredible. That was early days.
That wasn't the visuals for worship.
That's where Ezra's career started. Was
can you imagine singing "How Great Is Our God" with just two puppets behind you?
Yeah, right. Visuals at our church. Oh man, there really wasn't any. I remember when Gateway got Digital Juice. It was 50 DVDs or CD-ROMs filled with background visuals, and it was like the worst things you could imagine.
I think there were DVD ROMs because they had more storage potentially.
I mean, what were you guys even putting, if you're putting a CD, and this is my millennial like age, I mean, I just don't, and I grew up in a really small church, so we just had white text on a black screen and we sang on a hymnals, so we didn't have any sort of technology involved in the visual aspect. But what were you guys putting these visuals behind lyrics, or was it like a different strategy altogether back in the day?
Things were weird back then, man. It was like the dark ages where churches were learning how to use tech for the first time. You remember it. And I feel like being a Gateway was they had a good broadcast camera situation. And so it was a lot of IMAG. And then they would pull out live, LED walls or projectors like for live recordings. I think, 20 years ago, that was kind of the time that you would use visuals. It was like these special moments where, it was a conference or a whatever. And then obviously we've seen over the past few years that LED technology has become a lot more affordable. And so churches are starting to use it on a more regular basis. But man, back then it was a lot of just weird. It was just no one really, there was no, and I mean, I feel like there was no social media back then, so no one even was really seeing what the other churches were doing. There wasn't like a standard. This was pre-church front. You know what I mean? Like this is before you guys were teaching everyone how it's done. There
was no accountability with exactly. Every church was just kind of doing their own thing with whatever they found online or on a DVD set, and no one really knew what the other church was doing unless you went to some sort of tech conference. But yeah, I remember Ezra we made some stuff for some early Gateway recordings in like 2012. And it was just like grain and like stars, and we would just blend them together and see what we could make work. And that was like the dark ages. Like you said, we were like hunter gatherers, like just it's so bad.
Throw a grain filter, take a picture of some stars, add some motion to it. You're set. You've got a motion background.
Right.
Yep. Nobody knew also like how weird what they were doing was, because there was no social media. There was no like accountability, like you guys said. So it, aside from going to conferences, which is where everybody learned what was kind of out there, you just kind of thought, okay, what we're doing is pretty normal. Like we've been doing it for 5-10 years and this is just what we do. But then you kind of, social media becomes a thing and you see all the other things that are out there and people are like, oh, weird. You don't have two British puppets as a part of your video setup. Cool.
It was for kids' church. Okay.
We're just going to lay into that a little bit.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry I brought up Teddy.
No, I deserve it.
So from your guys' perspective, I would be like, for churches who maybe aren't using it, what's the why behind using a motion background in general? Like maybe one of you can take that question, maybe dive into more the philosophy behind why you put something behind your lyrics anyway, or on your LED walls as kind of, another visual asset. So I'll pitch it to you guys and see who wants to take it.
Yeah, I feel like, and I think it's kind of we talked about what it was 20 years ago, and now, we can kind of talk about what it is now, but I feel like that transition point is kind of important to talk about because, like I said, there's been, a massive shift in availability and affordability of this resource of being able to use an LED wall. Even during the pandemic and all this stuff, it's like there's so much need for video to be an important part of the church world. I mean, it's a massive part of just how we communicate now. And so then we're also looking at, slightly bigger rooms in general. Like a lot of churches, I feel like growing up for me, it was like, man, if you can't see, if you're sitting past the 7th row, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. You're not going to be able to read the scriptures, the notes that the pastor has. So LED walls have been really important, not just for worship as like a stylistic thing, but I feel like even just from a functionality standpoint, they've become such an important part of how we communicate to the back rows, how we just communicate announcements so that we don't have to have someone standing up on the stage for 15 minutes. Like, they became this really valuable tool in a lot of different functions in church. Yeah. So I feel like, as far as like the actual, the why behind it, it's like, it's going to be a part of the service. It's an important part of being able to communicate with our audience and our congregations. And during worship, I think that it can be used very intentionally.
At Gateway growing up, so like churches used to have to do stage designs. And it was like, I've seen churches put like screen door materials and crinkle it up and like shine lights up them. And then it's like, we're doing a new sermon series. We need a different stage design. And they can solve all of that with putting a giant LED screen up. And then, you can do columns, or you can do just one large screen. You can configure it differently, or you can just put a different background up. And the LED screen gives churches this canvas for their stage that they can easily tweak with just, a PNG file. And now they've got a whole new stage design. So no more coming up with stage designs. And that's great. And it's this amazing tool. It's the biggest light fixture on your stage. It's the loudest member of your band. And then we've got, some churches have 20 minutes of worship. Some churches have an hour of worship, but you can't just have a blank screen during worship. And, Ezra and I have both seen ups and downs in the journey of the LED screen. There was a season where we were making time coded out visuals that, we got the tracks from the music director, and we were making, verse, chorus, bridge, different look for everything. And then, over the last couple of years, we've started just doing one look per song. Heck, sometimes our church has done one look for the whole worship set. And it's been interesting to see it evolve. You need something on the screen during worship. We don't want it to be distracting at all. That's like the thing, is like, it's a background, it's a backdrop, a canvas, and then it just has to be worshipful. I've seen it used really powerfully where people pay attention to it. I remember a visual Ezra did a few years ago where it was, I think it was for the song Miracles by Jesus Culture. And he took all these pictures, and it was like an X-ray of a broken bone and like a wedding photo. And they were like split, and then they came back together. And it was this like powerful moment in service where we're singing Miracles, and we're seeing like a marriage photo come back together, and we're seeing an X-ray of a broken bone come back together. And it was just like, everyone in the crowd is like seeing miracles happen on the screen, and they're like, yes, you're the God of miracles. And that was like one powerful way that visuals can be used. But I think the majority of the time we're just like, let's put a texture, light, some sort of background that just is in the background, and it serves as just a backdrop for what God's doing in the room. It can enhance it, but for the most part, we just want it to be a part of it and not draw any attention to it, so people can really focus on worshiping God.
Yeah, I'll try to follow Paul's brilliant answer that he shared about the history of visuals there. That was amazing. I feel like a lot of it has to do with what's been happening recently. And, because the LED wall was such a new, fresh piece of technology that so many churches were using for the first time, there definitely was and has been a season, not that it's over, but I feel like the trend has kind of shifted where, there was a season where it was like, verse, chorus, bridge, everything's going to have a different moment. I remember working on a tour for Carrie Job and Cody Carnes for the Garden Tour a few years ago. And she used a phrase that was really powerful. She said, I want people to be able to worship with their eyes closed, like we do, but I want them to be able to worship with their eyes open as well. And so that was this like powerful phrase that we kind of like kept in the forefront of our mind of like, let's actually use this as a tool for worship, so that if people's eyes are open, a small, room or an arena, whatever, the people can connect with God, similar to that moment that Paul described of like the broken bones coming back together and seeing these miracles, happen sort of like in a metaphorical way. But over the course of time, I feel like, there's been kind of a shift where it's like, all right, we've had these like storytelling moments. We've had these moments where, the LED wall is in and of itself almost like we've mentioned, like a band member or like this new sort of featured thing. But I think that there's a shift towards wanting it to be more of a background element again. The church has come under a lot of scrutiny at large recently for being too flashy and too production focused and all these things. And I don't think that's what's caused the shifts, but I think just in general, especially just through 2020 and the pandemic, there was such a shift in like, does all of this really like matter as much as we thought? And should, does all this flashy stuff like really actually make a difference? And I think that was happening in mainstream music and in concerts as well. Like, and just, if you look at trends of any kind, when something gets like really cool and everyone's using it all the time, the only next step that can happen is for the pendulum to swing the other way and for us to be like, all right, let's actually not. So we're seeing, the 90s and the early thousands trends come back of like just using like stage like park hands, you know what I mean? Like kind of like going more vintage, even from a stage design as a whole, like, watching Elevation and, some of these guys, like a lot of people are barely using LED screens at all right now. And so our approach, to answer your question, circle back around, is like, I think that, we're sort of seeing this period of time where we still want to be able to use this amazing tool. There's still a need to fill the stage and fill the room with as a light fixture, fill it as a background element for your streams, all of this stuff. But for it to be changing every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds or every part of the song feels like a sort of an overkill at this point. And so our goal right now, especially as Sunday Screens, to serve the church as a whole, is to be able to just blend in and truly be a worship background, to be something that, again, becomes a lighting fixture. So we're very much thinking about these elements not as like storytelling or even scene setting things, as much as we are sort of like abstract pieces of content that can essentially blend in and work with the lighting, work with the stage design to pull attention to the song that is happening and pull attention to what's happening on the platform. And so our inspiration is coming more from like still images or modern art music. Like I, went in January and just visited a few like modern art museums, and I'm more interested in like how to create that sort of approach versus like flying a drone through the Grand Canyon, because we've seen that and we've done that, but A, that doesn't loop, so then we have to have these awkward crossfades, and B, it doesn't feel like it's part of the stage. It feels like it's kind of almost competing with the front of the stage versus kind of, so anyway, very long-winded answer, but that's kind of the thought behind some of the intentionality of.
Before we continue on with the video, I want to tell you about our sponsor, the Churchfront Live Conference. It's a 2-day conference with keynotes and breakout sessions on topics like worship tech, worship theology, musicianship, and leadership. It is a great way to network with other like-minded ministry leaders in the Churchfront community. The sooner you purchase your Churchfront Live tickets, the greater the discount you will get with the early bird discount code. So head on over to churchfrontlive.com, use that early bird discount code at checkout, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference. Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I like that you guys touched both on the shift in the pendulum, because I'm on previous podcasts I've had guests on, and that is starting to become a recurring theme of, I don't know what generation you would lock it under, but the pendulum does seem to be shifting a little bit more towards the simplicity or the more minimalist kind of service flow. And it's interesting to watch. I mean, it's, I know my generation, millennials, like they kind of crave that pew, like shoulder to shoulder, liturgical, more, I think more like structured, formative, service flow. And that's a broad overgeneralization. Of course, it doesn't apply to everybody, but even just in terms of visual aspects, you're right. It used to, I think back in the day, I think back to when I used to look at Willow and all the stage design stuff they would do. They would pull out all the stops and bring a ton of stuff onto stage, and it'd be really visually appealing, but the effort it would take to do that over and over again, not, let alone the cost. And then you talk about using your LED wall as like a stage design element, to kind of, you can break out the panels, so you can do different configurations. You could do what, the MGM Theater did in Vegas and make a sphere out of your LED wall apparently these days. So, but I just think about that shift toward more simplistic elements contributing towards one kind of holistic experience. And it's just interesting to watch. So I love that you guys have kind of tapped into that. When you guys were thinking through the kind of design element and what you wanted to provide with Sunday Screens, what were some of the pain points you were trying to answer and address with some of your layouts as you guys currently design backgrounds? What are some of those pain points you're trying to address for users?
Yeah, I think it was a philosophy we kind of started kicking around early on was, and it's a phrase that's kind of stuck with our company, was no digging, just gold. And I know so many church guys they had like 3 different subscriptions to different stock websites or whatever. And they were like, yeah, I got my whole afternoon's blocked out looking for content. And there was like almost like an overwhelm with how much content they had, but they still felt like they didn't have something that fit what they were trying to do that weekend, or something that didn't quite fit their style. And so they had, 10,000 stock backgrounds, and they're like, I just need one that feels right for this weekend, that's going to serve our church well. And so we came into this and we were like, let's let's only give the gold. Let's do quality over quantity. Let's use backgrounds that we love, that we connect with, that we feel like, we've really spent the time figuring out what colors we want to do, how much grain, what texture are we doing? How's the movement? Is the pace right? And then let's just do 10 a month, and they're all going to be good. And I'm going to feel happy with every single look. And so that's one pain point, is like just I've talked to so many church guys, and they're like, we can't get enough content, but at the same time, if there's 100,000 clips to look through and 5 of them are good, it's like, which one's more helpful? And so we wanted to just only give our very best and only give things that we feel super proud of and feel like it fits kind of this modern, minimal style that we're going for.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the pain point that we're hoping to solve too is like, Paul and I have both worked with, the quote unquote like big churches or big artists. And we've had an amazing privilege to kind of see, to get to work with those guys. And in that, you start to get a feel for like what works no matter what in any room, in pretty much any song. And so whether it's in an arena or, First Baptist down the street, like there are a few things that consistently work that every service or every church really needs. Every, that variety of seeing third or fourth song, you're hitting something a little bit sort of moodier and, darker. We're going to need something that has a big moment of declaration, to have a cross or the name of Jesus or something that is declarative that really connects with the lyrics that we're actually singing. And so we've seen these moments through experience with these guys. And then the second, pain point was that we were really seeing that like, there were people and are people who have access to pay for custom visuals for a song, or they have access to, the guys who have been in this world. And it's kind of a small handful of people who are doing church visuals or, Christian worship visuals consistently. And rather than sort of letting this just be like custom one-off things, we're like, these songs are now, the songs that you're basically, getting custom visuals for, now the rest of the church are singing. So why can't we kind of connect the dots here and, essentially contract these guys to create the visuals for the songs for everyone. And now we can all use them together, like kind of just really seeing the church like unified in their ability to have access to the guys who think in this realm and who do this on a day-to-day basis and, who have seen in the room how this works consistently. So that's one of our favorite things, has been not just me and Paul sitting in a cave and like, cranking this stuff out, but actually getting to work with some of our best friends and I think some of the most creative minds in the church when it comes to visuals. And so the collaborators, that's such a huge part of what we've been really intentional with. So like Jacob Boyles, who is like the creative director for Elevation Worship. He did all the branding. And Cameron Benjamin, who works at Victory Victory? Anyway.
Victory in Tulsa.
Yeah, so he's like an incredible lighting designer. I guarantee you've seen his designs as you're scrolling through Instagram if you follow this kind of circle of, stuff. And, and he's incredible doing visuals. Jonathan Mendoza, who goes by Mendo, he's like literally one of the best motion designers, not just in the church, but in the whole industry, and serves, at church with us every week. And so to be able to like find these guys who are like doing this for their church and see the quality of stuff that they're putting out and then be like, hey, how would you feel about serving the church as a whole? I think that's really the thing that we're most excited about is just connecting the dots, because we could totally just do this in our own little bubbles. But because we now have the power of social media and the internet and being able to share all this stuff, it's like, let's actually get united. It really goes back to what we were saying, a few minutes ago. It's like there was a dark ages when we had no accountability for a level of excellence or a level of, what's even a creative idea that's working. And now we have the ability to share that, knowledge, to share those resources. And so that's kind of one of our favorite parts about it.
I love it. It's really cool to hear more in depth kind of behind what you guys are doing and how it works. One of my like maybe guilty pleasure questions would be, what's one of your favorites and why? If you guys design and you're specific with what you design and how you design it. So anything stick out right now? And I can throw some visuals into the YouTube episode of this later. But as you're working and looking at your content library, is there anything that you're like super, super jazzed about specifically because of the story behind it, or, you know, the particular, you know, work that it took to make that happen the way it did? Anything come to mind?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I think my favorite pack is the one, it's called Spirit, and Ezra designed it. And it's like this prism glowing thing, and it's like abstract, and the movement feels really good, and it's got this glow to it, and it's what I picture when the scripture says the Spirit was hovering over the water. That's like what I picture for some reason. It's like this strange prism thing that to me represents the Holy Spirit. So that might be too weird of an answer, but that's probably the visual I'm excited about. That, and we have a pack coming up that reminds me of those styrofoam cups from the 90s that had that like Taco Bell like weird design. So that one's not out yet at the time of this podcast recording, but that one's pretty cool
I'll
too.
look forward to it. I'm excited to see it. What about you, Ezra? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, man. I mean, Paul worked on a pack. We're kind of just doing that like buddy, like, yeah, hey, I love you. Your pack is so cool thing. But he did a pack called Declarations, which I love because, and we've seen it. It's probably the most used one that we're seeing right now, but it deserves it because it's literally just the name of Jesus kind of like on loop, that kind of scrolls, and it just fills, you know, I mean, think about like What a Beautiful Name, or there's so many just moments in services that are so fitting for that. And then Cameron Benjamin worked on a pack called Glass, Abstract Glass, and it's like, I don't know how he did it, and I want to find out very badly, but it's just the texture. It's so interesting because it's essentially just a gradient, but there's like a sort of a vertical, it feels like it's like being a gradient that was shot, you know, through like a pane of glass or whatever. And so it feels super interesting. We've seen it work, you know, at our church. We're seeing it on the road with Carrie and Cody. We're seeing it a bunch of different places, and it just, every time I see it, I'm like, man, lighting guys love it because it's, you know, it's got a nice variety of hues that kind of go with any moment. So yeah, those are two of my favorites right now. But
really cool. What is Carrie Job's favorite motion background that you guys have made?
Good question. I don't know. We're working on one. We're working on one for the dove right now, and it's literally like an abstract version of a dove that I'm very excited to very clearly match with her song. And so yeah, we're very excited about that one for sure. I think she's liking that one.
I love it. Yeah, it's good to hear sometimes that artists actually like care about what's, you know, the whole experience, because I think it just, you know, gives that much more credibility to their artistry. You know, it's not just a song, it's not just a band, it is the whole element of what they I guess perform, you know, from top to bottom. So that's cool. Mike, my next question for you guys, and something I'd like you guys to speak into, is I know on, whether it was on the website or maybe it was on socials where I saw this, but it says, you know, it's really designed with LED walls in mind. So my follow-up questions, I'm sure you guys can imagine, is what about those churches who don't have LED walls? Do these backgrounds work without LED walls? Are they good for TV screens? Like, can you use them just, you know, on a projector? Like, what would you guys say to those churches who might be listening who don't have an LED wall infrastructure?
I would say that we definitely designed it with LED screens in mind. And I think we're learning a lot as we go about our preferences versus, you know, what works in general a little bit. Like, I personally really like a lot of the negative space looks that have a lot of kind of black, but that's not going to work on a projector. So we've tried to include something in every pack that covers the whole screen edge to edge. And so, because, you know, on a projector, you're not getting true black. And I think there's a couple looks that might be best suited for an LED wall just because of the blacks. But yeah, I think, you know, I've seen churches that do, you know, they just have the two TVs on the side of the stage. And I think that's like a discussion if you want a background on a TV or if you just want to do lyrics. But, you know, it would definitely work on a TV. And so we're trying to keep in mind the brightness up at the top of the screen and make sure we're not doing pure white up there. I think we've tried to approach it in a way that it would work for projectors, LED screens, TVs, anything like that, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I just know LED walls are becoming much more affordable and much more accessible. I think there's more companies who have gotten into the distribution of the panels and the assembly of the panels and kind of debunking the myth of the complexity of a LED wall. And so they're like, yeah, network and power and a processor, here you go. You're up and running. And so it's allowing a lot more churches to say, man, do we want to replace our projectors, or should we just go with an LED wall? And it becomes, like you guys have already spoken to, a stage design element that you can kind of custom configure to map your needs. But I like what you said, because it is something for listeners to consider, the designs with kind of that negative space element. If you don't know what negative space is, it's really where that black comes in and contrasts something that's present, right, in the design. So it is something to consider when you're looking at these images, to say, how is this going to translate into our environment, right? Is it going to look appropriate on a TV? It really, when it's designed with an LED wall in mind, it's made, with that approach. And I think that's really cool that you guys have kind of niched into that, because it makes it a better product, right? It makes it a really high quality, thoughtful design that serves really well, and I think delivers really well without a lot of extra work to go into it, right? So I appreciate you just giving some clarity there. What's the next step for people who want to find out more about Sunday Screens? Like, where should they find you? How do they get started with a membership, or how does the kind of process work for a user or for a church?
Yeah, so super simple. We are two places right now. We are on our website and we're on Instagram. We are trying to just really hone in. But yeah, if you want to learn more, you can just go to sundayscreens.com. And yeah, I mean, our membership is basically set up. We wanted to be able to be accessible to both like churches who are ready to go all in and know that this is the thing for them. And so we do have a yearly membership that allows you to save, but we also have a monthly option that's just $29 a month. And so I feel like, our hope is that would be a really affordable, entry point for people to give it, get in, try it out. We also have a free sample pack that has 5 of, honestly, some of my favorites that are out right now. And obviously we're adding to it over time, but yeah, you can download 5 free visuals for your service this weekend if you want to grab those, and you just kind of, go to the site and put it in. And then we're on Instagram too, if you want to follow along with more of our, process and journey and more of the sort of fun stuff there. It's just at Sunday Screens.
I love it. Anything as we wrap, anything that we didn't touch on that you would hope listeners would know about Sunday Screens, or would know about just using visuals, and, from your guys' time working with artists and big crews out there, and even in your own church, that you'd be like, man, I wish more people understood this piece of it. Anything come to mind for you guys?
I would say, like, the scripture, when the Apostle Paul says everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, I think applies to church production teams and media teams like so much more than we realize in a practical standpoint. So I know me and Ezra both are big fans of less is more. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so we try to take that approach to our church and how we think through visuals and stuff. And so I would say, like, yeah, just the production aspect should not be noticed. That's the win. Like if people walk away and they're like, wow, the background videos were crazy, that's like not a win. We want them to hear God and worship and connect with God through worship, and not be thinking about the screen. And we want it to be pleasing. We want it to be aesthetically nice and have a good design element to it. But we just want churches to win and have access to great video content. And we don't want it to be distracting. We want it to be just a backdrop for connecting with the Lord.
Yeah, the analogy that we've been using recently is like, if you had a drummer on your worship team who showed up one day wearing like a satin purple blouse, and he was twirling his sticks and he was like doing all this stuff, you'd probably have a conversation with him. But the LED wall and the projector, whatever you use for visual communication, is like a much bigger and louder and brighter member of your band. And it's something that you should steward on your platform just as much as all the other aspects of what goes into it, from design to how you dress to everything. So I think that when you kind of think about it as like, okay, how do we actually want to like communicate or be presented as a team? Is this something that needs to be flashy and distracting? Is this basically just another version of Instagram where I'm watching like travel videos? Like, these are things that I think if you kind of think about it like as a real almost as like a person or of your band. Like I was saying, it's like, it kind of makes it easier to make good decisions, I think. And no matter if you use Sunday screens or not, like there are amazing visuals out there. And so our heart is really just to see the church enter a new level of intentionality in this season around production, like Paul said, not just about worship visuals, but just in general, just to like, I think when our worship pastor says this really powerful thing that stuck with me, she says, assume that God has something to say about everything. And I think that the more we learn how to do that as production leaders, the more we're going to experience God in a new way ourselves, and then be able to lead people in our congregation into that experience as well.
Yeah, that's exceptional. My biggest takeaways from our conversation have been really that the LED wall and the graphics you use are kind of like a band member. They're not only a lighting source, but they really are a band member that's communicating something, and using that in a non-distracting way is critical. And just because you can do something, because there's a lot of stuff we can put on the screen, doesn't mean that you should. And sometimes less is more in order to keep the main thing, the message of the gospel, allow people to connect with God. And so, man, you guys brought tons of value and insight to people today. And so I'm super thankful for your time. And I'll list all of the social profiles, the links, all the things in the description and the show notes of this episode and of this video so that people can check it out. And we're really excited to just see where Sunday Screens goes, to see the next couple packs come out. I'm really excited about this styrofoam cup idea. I'm a sucker for nostalgia. So if it reminds me of a Taco Bell cup, I'm here for it. I love it. Cool, guys. Well, thanks so much for being on. And we hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Luke.